Today I want to talk about Skirmisher and how I beat insane roguelike difficulty with it. In the first part of the video I'll go over all the Skirmisher talents, and in the second one I'll show you the character I beat the game with and talk you through leveling, Prodigy's gear and so on, but the focus will be a little different since I think Skirmisher is the best class for new players trying to learn the game, because it is easy to unlock, it is extremely powerful both offensively and defensively, it gives a lot of sustain and free stats from its tree, which makes gearing easier, and it's also fairly simple, which is great since you are already overwhelmed with information when learning the game. My goal is that it will help you get significantly further in the game than you've managed so far. To unlock Skirmisher, spoiler alert, you need to counter-strike an enemy from 5 tiles or more. Counter-strike is a debuff that doubles the next attack's damage, and it is applied when you block all incoming damage. To easily do this, you can start a new character with the Bulwark class and get enough gold so that you can buy a Sling and the Shoot talent from Last Hope, and then all you need to do is find some weak enemy, fully block their attack with your shield, and then run away and shoot them with the Sling. Skirmisher only uses stamina as its resource, which works the way you expect it to, and it has regular fatigue penalties. Let's get into the talents, starting with Buckler training. Buckler expertise is a passive that lets you use shields, which normally require strength, and gives a chance to completely ignore damage from melee attacks. With 100 cunning, it gets to 27%, which is not high enough to completely rely on it, but it's still very good. It also gives armor and armor hardiness, but only if you wear light armor, and this is not the only powerful talent to have this requirement, so that's what you'll want to wear. You can also just still focus on defense, but when an attack does get through, you'll have some of this armor to reduce it. Investing points here is a luxury for later on in the game, since the percentage chance doesn't increase that much. Bash and Smash is the button you press when an enemy manages to get close to you. It knocks them back and does a ton of damage, especially later once you get this to the threshold to strike twice with your shield. To reach this threshold, you only actually need 4 points in this talent, because what counts is the effective talent level, which is simply the talent level multiplied by the tree mastery, which is usually 1.3. This is how it works for every talent that says it requires a certain talent level. Buckler Mastery then also gives you a chance to completely ignore damage from projectiles, and there are a lot of them in Tome. It's not just arrows, a lot of spells for example are projectiles, so this has value in the vast majority of fights, and it even upgrades your Bash and Smash, so I like maxing this talent first out of this tree. And just when you thought fighting skirmishers could not get more annoying, there is Counter Shot, which also does damage when a skirmisher gets to completely ignore an attack. Even if you don't plan on playing this class, it's good to get familiar with this tree, as this is a big reason for why they can be so terrifying in the hands of the AI. This talent works fine for just a single point to apply your poisons and other on-hit effects, but in the late game you'll have enough points to sprinkle in a bit more and have it actually deal damage. The next category is not named in the most imaginative way, it's Skirmisher-Slings. Sling Supremacy is weapon mastery, but for slings. You want to max this pretty quickly for the damage, and the reload rate is also very relevant. Each time you fire your sling, you lose ammo, which you can reload by resting or simply moving. Swift Shot fires a shot increasing your attack speed, which applies to your basic attacks and all attack talents. When you hover over a talent, you can look at the usage speed, which tells you what type of talent it is and which speed it uses. As if Swift Shot was not already incredible, it also fires at double your attack speed, so this is the perfect opener. You can usually get in Swift Shot and another attack before the enemy has time to act. The range of specifically attacks on ranged classes usually scales with their weapon. So it starts out with 6 with a tier 1 sling, but gets up to 10 with a tier 5 sling. On weapons, you should prioritize range above any other stat. Hurricane Shot is the much needed AoE for Skirmisher. At level 3, it will shoot twice at all enemies in range, which not only makes it great at clearing trash, but it also just makes it good at damaging a single target too. So you want to get it to the threshold as soon as possible. Skirmisher does not have a ton of options for how to build your character. The biggest decision you'll have to make is whether to focus on cold shots or bombardment for your damage. I have 2 insane roguelike winners for this class, and the plan was for the second character to really test out bombardment, but I ended up going cold shot anyways. First, let's get this out of the way. Both of these are perfectly valid and extremely powerful options. The advantage of bombardment is supposed to be the consistent DPS, whereas cold shots are for more of a hit and run strategy, since you rely on talents with cooldowns instead of simply attacking. But I do not enjoy playing with bombardment. It eats through your ammunition and stamina, and this makes it feel much worse to play, especially early game, since you will have to micromanage it and toggle it on and off. For a comparison, let's now jump to cold shots. Kneecapper is just a higher damage shot that also pins. Additionally, all the cold shot talents pass through enemies, so you can target anything you want, which is wonderful. Kill shot is the talent that lets you ignore the run part of the hit and run strategy. It has to be one of the hardest hitting talents in the entire game. In the late game, this will one-shot most enemies at long range, even uniques. Unfortunately, it has a very long cooldown of 8 turns. Or does it? Noggin Knocker stuns, while also doing a surprising amount of damage over 3 shots. This is what Bombardment wishes it could be. But while these talents are decent, the best is yet to come. Sling Sniper is a passive that greatly improves all your cold shot talents. First, it helps you get to the desired 100% critical chance faster and makes the crits hurt more. Then it reduces the cooldowns by 2, which might not seem like much, but it makes a big difference. And then it gives you tons of physical penetration, up to 49% with 100 cunning. This makes playing the mid-game so much more comfortable. You don't need to keep using the cloak with 30% phys penetration, even though all the other stats are useless. You have Sling Sniper. This is ultimately what makes me want to play cold shots over bombardment. I just can't say no to all these free stats. Tireless Combatant is here to help with stamina management, and it also has what might be my favorite talent in Tome. Breathing Room passively gives you stamina regen when there are no enemies next to you. It might not seem like much, but it adds up and just feels great to have. You have enough points on Skirmisher to get to the threshold eventually, but it's mostly for more stamina rather than the health regeneration. Pace Yourself is a sustain that gives you permanent flat damage reduction in exchange for reducing your global speed. And I love this talent, which might come as a surprise to you, as I am a big fan of global speed, but if there is one thing I love more than that, it is flat damage reduction. The reason for why it's so good is that it applies to each instance of damage you take. Let's take one of the scariest attacks in the game, Flurry. It hits 4 times, and the flat damage reduction will apply to each hit. Rogues also often have some kind of on-hit damage on their weapons, which would apply 4 times for each hit, but since it's counted as a different instance of damage, the flat damage reduction will also apply to it on each hit. Then also rogues have poison and bleeds, which would damage you over the next few turns, but flat damage reduction works really well against damage over time effects. But honestly, you don't really need to worry about the details, you will feel how much tankier you are. Max this immediately. You can wait until you have 3 points in it before turning it on, just so the speed penalty isn't so severe, but it really is such a small price to pay for how good it is, and you open each fight with Swift Shot, which gives you a lot of speed anyways. Oh, and this talent also automatically activates your block, so you should never use it manually. Dauntless Challenger again gives you stamina and eventually health regen, definitely worth the 3 points for the threshold. And Eternal Warrior slowly gives you all resist in combat, while also making your regen talents better, so this is all good, and I like maxing this eventually. There are 2 locked categories, although you might only see one. Trapping you will definitely see, and I have never actually played a character that utilized this 3, and it's one of those that's difficult to judge without seeing it in action, but I don't think spending turns putting down traps is something you want to do on Skirmisher. Or at least it's definitely not something I want to do. And then there are poisons, which only shows once you side with the Assassin Lord on any playthrough, who you can meet after level 18. But don't worry if you don't see it, you won't need this category early on, so you can just unlock it as you play. Apply Poison gives a percentage chance to apply poison on hit, which deals some nature damage. The damage of this is not very relevant for Skirmisher, you just need a point in this to turn it on. Toxic Death makes your poison spread in a small radius when poisoned enemies die. This is not even worth the 2 points for the better radius, since Skirmisher just uses poison for the debuffs on uniques. You get those debuffs through Vile Poisons, which unlocks poison enhancement each talent point and lets you use 2 of them. Numbing Poison reduces damage, Insidious reduces healing, Crippling gives a chance to fail using talents, Leeching heals you for the poison's damage, and Volatile increases the poison's damage and also makes it deal damage in an AoE. You only really need 3 points here for the Numbing and Crippling poisons, which are just always useful. Venomous Strike then does nature weapon damage and applies debuffs based on the Vile Poisons used. Numbing Poison's effect is a slow, so that's very good, but Crippling places some random talents on cooldown, which usually has very little impact. Still, I don't think any of these are good enough to run over Crippling Poison. I've read some people like Leeching Poison for the heals, but I don't think it's worth it. On the generic side, we have Mobility, which is one of the best defensive trees. Disengage is a teleport that also gives you a mini movement infusion after you use it. The downside is that you can only target it in a line away from enemies, which sometimes makes it a bit awkward, but generally that is the direction you want to go. I like getting this to at least 2 points for the extra range. Evasion instant speed gives you a big burst of defense and a percentage chance to just avoid attacks. It does consume quite a lot of stamina, so I still prefer running away and creating distance against all the rogues and warriors, but situationally this can be useful. Tumble is the nuts. It's an instant speed, short range teleport, which is just incredibly useful for creating distance just to get away from enemies, or it can be used offensively by spotting enemies with track and then tumbling around the corner so that you don't have to spend the time moving one tile. You appear instantly and you can unleash your powerful attacks as soon as possible. You want either 2 or 4 points for the range. Trained Reactions is a sustain that reduces the damage of big hits by up to 1/3 with some defense, and with a lot of defense, on my character I got it to 42% damage reduction. This is not all resist this time. I'm pretty sure this actually reduces damage, as you can see it in the log. This means it is insanely good. The only problem is that it can chew through your stamina really quickly, so you might not want it on early game, but eventually you want to max it and always run it. Then there's the common Survival. Heightened Sense needs a point to get to the good stuff. Device Mastery is always at least decent. It lets you use actives on your items more often, so any leftover points can always be put here. Track is the best defensive talent in the entire game, and it only requires a single point. Not having to face check the entire dungeon and seeing where all the uniques are is just invaluable. And Danger Sense is pretty worthless unless you are going for saves. Scoundrel is a category where all the talents are quite good, but none are worth maxing because of the diminishing returns. Lacerating Strikes is a passive that has a percentage chance to basically double your damage, although it takes 4 turns. The bleeding stacks, so it's never wasted. Scoundrel's Strategies makes your attacks apply a debuff that reduces crit multiplier, which is great, since you want to avoid high damage spikes. Misdirection passively gives you a chance to avoid all physical effects, which are most debuffs in the game. It also even gives a respectable amount of defense, so it's incredibly powerful. And Fumble might be the best one. It makes your attacks apply a stacking debuff that makes enemies eventually fail their talent. Then it resets and you can do it again. There is no cooldown, which is crazy to me. Despite this being so good, you don't need it maxed, since it always stacks by 3%, and once you reach, let's say, 27%, they should fail their talent before you attack 6 more times. The damage this does is not important. So here's my guy, straight from the final boss. These are the add-ons that I use. None of them fit gameplay, they are mostly UI, and if you're a new player, you don't need to worry about it. I am trying a new segment to these guides. I recorded myself playing through High Peak and the final boss in the entirety, and I have uploaded it as an unlisted video, so that if you just want to look at how the class plays, or maybe how do I use track in what kind of situations, it's linked in the description. It's, I think, over 20 minutes of just gameplay. There's no commentary, just me playing through High Peak. So I'm not sure if people will find that useful, but it's there, and I think I'll do it for all these videos in the future also. And before we get into the character and the specifics, I want to show you how targeting works in this game, which is important for any ranged class, pretty much. So if you have a target that's behind another target, like here, you see that I cannot shoot the second target dummy. I hit the first one. If I click on the second one, the bullet flies in, but it hits the first target dummy. But there is a way to actually hit the second one. In specific situations, what you can do is try and drag your cursor behind the target you want to hit, which will change the way the projectile will go, and in some scenarios like this one, it will let you hit the second target. But if I would left click right now, since I'm targeting the wall, nothing happens, right? The bullet doesn't come out because it's just an invalid target. This is where holding control comes in. You can even see it here in the tooltip. When you hold control, you basically just manually target and force fire your weapon. So if I hold control, the targeting turns yellow, and when I left click, it actually flies and hits the enemy. So it's good to know. It's not too crucial, but it's not only useful on classes like Archer or Skirmisher, but even a lot of mages send out projectiles as spells, and you can also utilize it there. Another scenario where this can come in useful is that, let's say this dummy is running towards me, but he's 7 range away, and let's say I have only 6 range. What you can do is control shoot in front of him, and with a bit of luck, he will move before the projectile arrives at the tile and run into the bullet. This is mostly useful early game where you don't have any other talents to use, so if you just see an enemy approaching, you can just keep shooting at your max range, and eventually you'll get off a free extra attack basically. In terms of the stats, it is very straightforward this time. You pump your dexterity first, because that is what increases the damage of your weapon, while also letting you unlock all your talents. Then you go into cunning, which gives you crit. Third, you go for magic, despite you not using magic at all. We are going to be taking Arcane Might as our second Prodigy, which scales off of magic to increase our weapon damage. And finally, the last points, you can put into Constitution for some extra max life, since you won't have much of it. You see I only have 999, which is pretty low as far as late game characters go, but I just felt so tanky that I didn't feel like this would really make a difference. So I think it's a much better idea to just put it into strength for the physical power, since you need it to apply your stuns and pins and stuff like that, and this helps keeping your physical power high enough. For your race, there are many options, many good options. You could go Drem to reset the cooldown of your cold shot talents. My previous character was a halfling for the thick HP on level, and better crit and pin and stun immunity. But I think Shalor is probably the best, because unlike most weapon classes, Skirmisher doesn't have access to blinding speed or any other form of global speed increase, so Grace of the Eternals comes in very, very useful, because this doesn't stack with blinding speed. If you have blinding speed and Grace of the Eternals, it just overrides itself. So this is the perfect opportunity to use this race. You just pop this at the beginning of every fight, and it's really, really powerful. Then you get Magic of the Eternals, which just passively gives you crit chance and crit multi. And since you don't have too many generic talents, you can afford to max this. Then Secrets of the Eternals is the one. Whatever talent, it will just sometimes make you invisible. And this is only really useful in the early game, where the stealth power will actually be high enough for some enemies to lose track of you, which just means they either fire spells randomly or just move around instead of attacking you. So it's not even that bad. And then lastly there is Timeless, which is extremely overpowered, as it instant speed basically removes all of your debuffs, cools down all of your talents, and increases any buffs you have. So what you can do is pop Grace of the Eternals, then go through your whole spell rotation with Kill Shot, Noggin Knocker, Kneecapper, and then you can Timeless, prolong your Grace of the Eternals, reset the cooldown of all your cold shots. It's just pretty incredible. Although that is a pretty greedy way to use it. Ideally, you should save it to actually remove debuffs, because you don't need it for the damage, but it's a nice option to have. For the leveling, there is only really one obstacle that you could run into, and that's if you don't find any ammo for a while. Because on ranged classes, what really matters is your ammo. This dictates the damage you deal. You can see here, this is where the Arcane Might applies. It uses 50% cunning, 50% magic, and 70% dexterity. So this is what you care about. This will dictate whether you start killing enemies or whether you struggle to kill any rare you come upon. Your weapon, you just want the highest tier you can find, which increases the range of not only your attacks, but all of your talents as well. And unlike melee characters where you can use an axe or a sword or a mace, here you specifically need bullets and you specifically need a sling, and it is possible it will take you a while to find one. And for me it took until like level 10, where I just still used the basic sling and ammo, and I just couldn't kill enemies. So what I had to do is go and buy some ammo and a sling from a shop, and after that it is just smooth sailing. The very first thing is pace yourself, you get this to 5 points, you turn it on, and enjoy just being invulnerable to basically all enemies in the early game. Especially white mobs, they literally cannot touch you. You can just go AFK or just hold your wait key and they might not be able to kill you ever. You do struggle a tiny bit with stamina before you have points to put into Breathing Room and Dauntless Challenger and Eternal Warrior, but I still wouldn't call it a difficult early game. Your auto attacks will be pretty powerful, and Swift Shot is pretty cheap, only costs 15 stamina. So when you get really low, you can just Swift Shot, basic attack, Swift Shot, basic attack, and that should eventually kill any enemy you come across. After you max out your Sling Supremacy, you get to start improving all the other parts of your tree, so slowly working on Sling Sniper, slowly upgrading your defensive talents from Buckler training, so that when your flat damage reduction stops being as powerful, you have complete damage reduction on a percentage chance, but still. Then you also unlock poisons, which you want to invest into to get that numbing and crippling, just in case your enemies wanted to play the game and use their talents. And after that, you'll finally have time to put points into Tireless Combatant, and then you're not really ever even running out of stamina, and you'll cruise through the mid-game and enjoy one of the most pleasant late games on any character, as your kill shot just becomes worthy of its namesake, because whatever you aim it at will actually just die. There's actually one more problem that I forgot to mention. Enemies that have really high armor are quite problematic. This is usually not that much of a problem on most weapon classes because they either have some form of armor penetration built in, or it is on their weapons. But slings don't give any armor penetration, and even the bullets usually have quite low armor penetration. With the item description what I'm using, armor penetration is shortened to APR, so 14 is not all that much. So if there are any enemies that will give you trouble, it is enemies that have high armor. But while it may take you a long time to kill them, they shouldn't really ever be able to endanger you. On the generic side, you need a point in heavy armor training, so that you can use gauntlets, heavy helms and heavy boots. Then you want to max out thick skin as soon as possible really, just to get that all resistance. I like maxing combat accuracy, even though we go dexterity, which gives accuracy by itself. I'm a firm believer in never really having enough accuracy, because if you do have too much accuracy, every weapon type has a different type of bonus for excess accuracy, which you can see here under ACC+. Slings get 0.2% extra base damage, which is not a lot, you know, but it's never wasted. And then the enemies that do have high defense, you really don't want to be just missing them, because Skirmisher literally has nothing else. If they can't hit the enemy, you need to run away. In the mobility tree, be careful about turning on trained reactions. It is very powerful, but in the very early game you don't need it, since you have pace yourself and the flat damage reaction. It is mostly for later on. Basically, once you have Tireless Combatant and you've leveled up the stamina regeneration, that's probably when you can handle having trained reaction just permanently turned on. In the Scoundrel tree, I just ended up putting 3 points into each, just to hit the nice break points. And in survival, I put 4 points to Device Mastery, just so I can use my Torque of Psionic Shield more often. And I also found the Exec, which summons these spiders. And with 4 points in Device Mastery, I can actually use this twice, because it only uses 48 power, which I don't think you would ever really want to do. Even right now, I use it very, very rarely. I think I've used it like once in high peak. Basically, it can help you either pull an enemy around a corner, which Skirmisher can't really do. All of the talents are targeted, but let's say I am around the corner, the enemy is standing here. If I press this, the spider will pull the enemy and tank the most damaging talents. So that's one way you can utilize it. But it does reduce your light radius, so if it brings your light radius below 10, then you can just get rid of this. It's really not that important. But even if I didn't have this, I would still put 4 points here, just to use the Torque more often. I also put an extra point into Track, just for quality of life, and I forgot to take it out, so I can do that now. Since you only need to unlock one category, poisons, once you get the Worm Bile, you won't really have a target for the last category point. Either you can unlock an Escort tree. A really good option would be the Chance from a Sun Paladin Escort, which you can just put 3 points into it and it will let you cleanse debuffs by switching the Chance. But the downside is you delay that power, right? Whereas if you take Chant of Fortress like I did, you get that buff right away. You could also take Harmony and put some points into these talents, but they are not particularly impressive, especially since we don't take any willpower. So what I ended up doing is just putting the last category point into Cold Shots, which increases the tree mastery by 0.2. This is very close to useless. It makes a really, really tiny difference in terms of the percentages on the talents, but it lets you not think too much. It's the lazy option, so why not? Because there are real downsides to saving your category point for the Chance, for example, since you could miss that 10% physical damage resistance or the armor and the armor hardiness. Since because of Buckler expertise, I actually have 80% armor hardiness, 74 armor, despite wearing robes and having really high defense. So it's up to you. For the Prodigies, since we already took one of the most clearly powerful races in the game, we also take Etheral form at level 25. This gives you damage penetration, which together with Sling Sniper basically caps my resistance penetration for the cold shot talents, so that's really nice. It gives absolute damage resistance, which is not all damage resistance, it is just an extra stat that just reduces the damage again, so it's really good. And on top of that, it gives you tons of defense and basically guarantees nothing will be able to hit you around level 25 when you take this Prodigy. Then if you don't have any items that give defense, late game, some enemies will again be able to hit you, but once you get to the Font of Sacrifice and edit your items a little bit, get some defense on your gear, you can get it really high. Like 108, 109, basically means you dodge every enemy other than rogues that have the talent that boosts accuracy by like 1000. Those will still obviously hit you, but the vast majority of enemies won't. So this makes sure our defenses are in order, and the damage should still be fine, but once we get to level 42, we pick up Arcane Might, and you should have your magic basically maxed at that point, and this adds a magic modifier to your ammo, gives you physical power, which is nice because since we don't max strength, it can be a bit of an issue, and it even gives us some crit chance, not much but a little bit, and it lets you feel good about getting spell crit on your items. So here on the Sling I have 2% spell crit, which obviously in reality doesn't actually give basically any physical crit, but at least it doesn't feel wasted. This is the best Prodigy for just pure damage, since we deal damage through kill shot, which scales just off of our ammo, off of base damage. This is the best you can do. It is possible to go Antimagic on Skirmisher. Obviously all your talents are just attacks, but it would require you to spread out your generic points really thin, and you lose out on some of the good item modifiers, so while I think it's definitely an option, it's likely better to stay away from Zigger. Not going Anti-Magic also lets you run Rune of Dissipation, even though to be honest, I didn't get much use out of it, because I just one-shot enemies through kill shot, so I didn't even have to strip their sustains. Then I have a really bad physical wild that scales with willpower for some reason. I was just too lazy to upgrade it. Then I Shatter Afflictions. This is another bonus. If you are not anti-magic, you get to run this, which just cleanses any debuffs. Then I ran a healing here, but for the final boss I swapped to Reflection Shield, which is just a big shield, always scaling with magic, that also reflects damage. I thought that would be more useful on the final boss, even though I don't think I took a single point of damage. And then obviously, you always want a movement infusion in my opinion, on any character. For the items, the priority should be on getting your resistances under control, because you don't really need penetration since you will get Sling Sniper. It's still nice to have some, because basic attacks are still a big part of your damage, but resistances are the most important. Then whenever you can, get some crit multi or some physical damage mod. You don't need much of it. You don't really need HP, even in the early game, because of the flat damage reduction. You can get away with just either taking aggressive items or stacking resistances from level 1. For your gloves, if you can find Daktun's gauntlets, these will be best in slot just because of the huge crit multi. You can see on the belt here is where I got just a bit of resistance penetration. On your boots, as usual, if you can get arcane modifiers, you want the Undeterred mod, which gives stun, confusion and silence immunity, which are the silence minus, confusion minus. That means immunity with the item description mod that I'm using. A Torque of Psionic Shield, just to get your flat damage reaction to even more insane levels. I find this to be the best tool, at least in the late game. I have a really good Lantern. Lanterns are really powerful item slots. You can see this gives me light, gives me a bunch of resistances, crit multi and fizz crit, and even some fizz power. Also makes me undead on top of that, which is not important, but why not? My rings are pretty miserable. I had to get some immunity on them, and I ran out of gold to roll for something better, so they're not ideal. And then for my shots, I am only using a Ego++ item instead of the usual random unique orange item. And there are a lot of very good mods for your ammo that give stun on hit, silence on hit, all kinds of bonuses on crit, like this one dealing extra physical damage and reducing healing. Just all kinds of really good on-hit effects. But then there are also mods that increase the base damage. And that's the one that rolled on this ammo. And I simply never found any other ammo that had higher power. And since I am one-shotting enemies, I don't really need on-hit debuffs, I just want the highest power. I think the closest other ammo, I found legendary ammo that had like 178 power and some good on-hit debuffs, and I just didn't think it's worth it. I'd rather use this one. You can also see this has a really high crit chance. So even though I only have 75 physical crit chance, for my attacks with my Sling, I actually have 95% crit chance. So those would be my basic attacks and like Swift Shot. And obviously for my cold shots, I then even get 13% bonus critical chance. My rope is probably my best offensive item other than the ammo, as it gives me a huge damage increase to physical. And for my shield, I have a bit of a spicy choice. This is a tier 5 unique, so you might not be able to find it. But what I really like about it is that it gives you 20 flat damage reduction, always. So together with this item, I have permanent 54 flat damage reduction. And with the torque, this gets to 195 flat damage reduction. So this is how I open fights. Almost kept out resistances, 195 flat damage reduction. Yeah, this makes it really difficult for enemies to harm me. That's basically the only stat that I care about from this shield. You don't really need high power on your shield. Sure, you have bash and smash, but that still mostly hurts because of the Sling attack that does 300% damage. And you also don't need the block to be the highest you can find, because the only talent that interacts with block is Pace Yourself, which just automatically activates your block sometimes. There's no other synergies with it. So if you find a shield that has crit multi on it, or a lot of life, or good resistances, but the block is not so high, I would still use it. I think until I found this shield, I just used a tier 4 with pretty bad power and pretty bad block that just had some nice stats. And then your weapon, which is usually one of your best items. Here is just kind of a weird stat stick for the ammo, and this is the best I could do. Just a bit of extra physical damage and some physical speed, which is why I ultimately went for this Sling. Fragmentation Shot and Pin Down are archer talents, so I don't get to use those. But yeah, the weapon is not important, you just want 10 range as soon as possible. For the Escorts, you want to take Dexterity whenever you can. The exceptions being Sun Paladin Escort, where you can either get the category or Chant of Fortress to make yourself beefier against physical damage. And then also if you find Thief Escorts, you can get the Scoundrel talents. So like here I got my Misdirection, so that's basically getting a free generic point, which is definitely better than getting +5 Dexterity. For the Alchemists, I realized I didn't even finish this quest. I mean, I got the Elixir of Focus and Elixir of Foundations, and Precision, which is the third one you would want, which gives you physical crit, and you likely want the class points before the generic points. The way combat plays out is that if you see enemies through track, you can tumble into action and open with Kill Shot, just so the enemy doesn't have time to move and dodge your cold shots. But if you are just auto-exploring and you run into an enemy, it is often a good idea to start with Swift Shot, and then you can go for Kneecapper, which will pin the enemy so that they can't move and dodge your other attacks, because you really don't want to miss Kill Shot or Noggin Knocker. But this is mostly a problem for the early game, because late game, since you will be also popping Grace of the Eternals, and then you will Swift Shot, which just gives you a ridiculous amount of speed, so you'll be able to unload all your talents before the enemy even has time to realize what's going on. But in the early game, missing enemies with Cold Shot is more of an issue, so that's especially where opening with Kneecapper is useful. Or you can just kind of get a feel for it. If an enemy hasn't acted in a while, it means it is probably about to take its turn, so you might not want to fire your cold shot at that exact moment. You can just fire a basic attack. Some of you might have noticed that despite me saying how good this class is and how easy it is, I actually have a death here in the character sheet. So how did it happen? How did I die? Well, I died to asphyxiation, purely. I was in the Lake of Nur, and I had the brilliant idea that instead of running around on the bubbles, what if I just spam the Auto Explorer button, which always moves you one tile, and then it stops and tells you you are suffocating, but if you spam the button, you actually move through the dungeon pretty quickly. So that's what I did, and then I thought, well, you know, once I start taking damage from the asphyxiation, I will just step on some bubbles, which will make me stop taking damage, and I'll be fine, and I'll explore the dungeon really quickly. Yeah, that's not exactly how it turned out, because asphyxiation is a debuff that deals, I think, like 1/3 of your health, of your maximum health, every turn, and you can't cleanse it, and it doesn't go away if you just step on the bubbles for a bit. So I just died, which would have been pretty annoying if I fully died, but thankfully I had a Blood of Life. So yeah, don't be stupid like me. Either get an item that lets you breathe underwater, or be patient and step on the bubbles. In conclusion, Skirmisher is, without a doubt, one of the best classes in Tome, while also being fairly simple, so it's the ideal choice for trying to overcome any roadblocks in your journey to beat the game. If I didn't explain something enough, feel free to ask in a comment. I'll do my best to help out. Good luck, and thank you for watching.